very warm afternoon to you all, and thank you for joining us for the 6th Ghana CEO Summit, brought to you by the CEOs Network Ghana in partnership with Deloitte, the GIPC, the State's Interest and Governance Authority, the University of Ghana Business School, and a host of other partners. This afternoon, we gather here to dwell on the topic, digital leadership for the digital economy. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the most important panel for today, the economy and the ease of doing business. For 30 minutes, this panel will run, and it will be moderated by Inshira Ado. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Inshira and his amazing panel.
Thank you very much, Jerry, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now, there's a public-private sector dialogue on Ghana's economic outlook, the ease of doing business, regulatory reforms, corruption crisis, public sector leadership, and technology towards a solution-oriented policy framework. Now, you'll all agree that when a combination of government policy, regulatory environment meets business tenacity and ingenuity in the delivery of goods and services and wealth creation, then you could say you have a high ease of doing business. Ghana has scored 60 points in the last doing business report. Now, that report originally started in 2003, and the World Bank took a decision to discontinue it while looking towards what they call the business enabling environment rankings, which is yet to start. But that said, we have dreams of growing our economy, and for that to happen, public sector, government, regulatory environment, and the players must create a level playing field and an enabling environment that would allow private sector to be able to deliver on their own shareholder expectations while solving problems. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to quickly mention all the panelists. Some changes occurred, so you may not have the right list in your brochures. We've got Ms. Domtie Efua Sarpong from the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Justice. She's a Principal State Attorney. Please nod so the team will recognize you. And we also have the head of SIGA, Ambassador Edward Boateng, and the CEO of GIPC, Mr. Yofi Grant, Mr. Humphrey Ayim Dake, who is the president of AGI, and I have Professor Peter Quarte with the University of Ghana, the Department of Economics. We also have Deborah Mausi Ajimfra. She's a deputy DG at the Securities and Exchange Commission. And also Mr. George Ankuma. He's a lead tax and regulatory partner at Deloitte. And of course, the Commissioner General, Reverend Amishadai Owusu Amwa. I'm going to start off by speaking to Mr. Grant. Now, the COVID pandemic taught us something, looking inward. Typically, the GIPC's mandate is to look for investment, and we tend to look outward for investment. In light of the need to expedite the ranking or how ease of doing business in Ghana is concerned, where do you see the low-hanging fruits for for us to start looking internally?
Thank you very much, and a good afternoon to everybody. Welcome, Vice President. Indeed, you ask a very interesting question because there are many dimensions to it. What we did post-COVID as a government was to come up with a plan called the Ghana Cares Obatampa program, which is COVID alleviation and revitalization of enterprises support program. Now, that program itself had a ticket of 100 billion cedis, of which government would supply just 30%. So 30 billion is supposed to come from government, and the remaining 70 billion from the private sector and investments. Now, from government's own study, there were certain specific economies that were listed to enable us build back better and build back stronger That meant creating jobs and creating further opportunity for economic growth. And those sectors were agriculture, agro-processing, a bit of infrastructure, manufacturing, health, construction, and construction, I'll put it there, and real estate, and then of course technology. And in the context of this summit, for us as GIPC, we've looked at the space, the technology space, in terms of what sort of ecosystem we're required to enable the programs that we'll execute to happen. And I look at it saying, okay, where's the world going to? There is Industry 5.0, which means that the level at which a lot of execution of activities will be with human intervention as well as robotics and artificial intelligence. And that will happen in the context of what we call Web 3.0, where now a lot of machine learning is going to determine how you do stuff. And so even in looking for investors in that space, we need to construct that architecture that brings in products and services that will fit into Web 3.0. And it's not just about bringing applications, but to see how those applications together will create more value for whether it's government or for private sector or whatever it is. And as you know, technologically, the world is moving towards what they call the metaverse, which is a blur between physical reality and artificial reality. And most of it is going to be by artificial intelligence. And so for us, we are looking for investments that will enable us be in that spot right there where artificial intelligence will drive a lot of the processes and stuff we do. And this morning, we heard a lot about how CRM is going to be very important and how technology and systems are going to be very important. And that really is where we are at, as looking at the broader picture. So, but looking at the other areas that we mentioned, which we believe will enable us build better, those are the areas that have been seen, not just in Ghana, but in many economies, to create jobs and bring back, a lot of activity back into the economy. And jobs are important, but investments are important because the more investments you're able to bring in, the more businesses you create. The more businesses you create, the more jobs you can create. And the more jobs you can create, the greater the chances of government also being able to get its taxes to build the economy. So we are looking at that whole ecosystem and build an architecture of attraction that will bring investors to partner with Ghanaians to execute and deliver that.
Thanks very much, Yofi. Humphrey, from AGI's perspective, you're heavy in that engine of growth of private sector. How well has government's policy in driving the agenda of taking advantage of the AFCFTA helped your group as far as your ease of doing business, whether it be it regulatory or cross-country, cross-border, access to electricity? Where are your sentiments at the moment?
All right, thank you. One is to narrow this to which of the policies that are aiding industry to take advantage of the AFTA program. One needs to say that our economy is evolving in the standard approach of what we call the factor economy, moving down to the investment economy and that of the innovative economy. We bring this up because in the factor economy, you and I know, has to do with natural resources and cheap labor, which is still existing in the structure that we have. We do have that of the investment. That's where you have the manufacturers creating products for export. And that is when AFTA comes into play. And then we do have that of the innovation. That's where you take advantage of digitization and leverage on the two, and then possibly do the AFTA job. And in this shape, one will also then look into the current trends of what is happening on the global market, which is the inflationary rates that are bedeviling everybody. So the question is, how do you take the innovative stage, leverage on the factor and the investment stage, and transform the structure of the economy? Once that is done, you then give capacity to manufacturers and entrepreneurs to build capacity, then to export and take advantage of the after project. However, there are a few challenges one identifies. And one could say that when you listen to the monetary policy report of the governor every now and then, and you see his 3 key critical issues that are the factors coming out of the producer price index, the CPI that leads into the inflationary rates, or the basket, agriculture, construction, and today in April, it's fuel that is driving. How do we use the innovation stage, which is the digitization stage, harmonize on these phases and bring about a transformation of the structure of the economy? Because in all the engagement, it comes back to saying, how can we transform the structure of the economy? One example the Olam Group gave that was impressive was using digitization to purchase for their procurement system and payment system all over the country in terms of buying of their various primary products, i.e. cashew. And all these products are purchased through this platform. And they also use the same platform to deploy what you call the banking facilities loan to the farm gate. So you see how broad digitization could leverage on the factor and investment economy and aid the transformation of the economy. So our concern is, how can policymakers leverage on digitization and target one area like agriculture that forms a major part of the inflationary basket and bring about transformation using digitization? That will lead to the PFJ, Planting for Food and Jobs, creating a lot of inputs, that's the industrial raw materials. Then these industrial raw materials then feed into the one district, one factory. However, whilst this project of 1D, 1F was going on through the PFJ, at a stage, there was reflection. They realized that the warehouse system wasn't sufficient and they introduced it. Then the question is, how do you deploy technology to see to the over 300 warehouses in the country, and then those who are in strategic areas that there are food? I had a news item today on Joy FM where somewhere in Tripoli, a lot of these outputs that are coming in are exported at its raw stage to neighboring countries, depriving the one district, one factories here the capacity to produce, the capacity to build their efficiency and quality and export into AFTA. So it's a real big convoluted issues that we need to use IT to resolve, and our case is to transform the structure of the economy, and I demonstrated that to the inflationary basket, which once it hits everybody. So in AGI, in SMEs, what are the low-hanging fruits that we chasten? We need to build capacity. We're looking for policies that will guarantee industrial raw materials in its quantity to make factories viable. Once you seek to do export into AFTA, you got to look for quality, for skill. And when you're talking about skill, you need numbers. This is another stage whereby you can use innovation to build cluster of SMEs all over the northern belt producing cashew nuts. And this cashew nut could be transformed to the next stage before exported. So my challenge to Olam is doing a lot of wonderful work procuring the raw material of cashew and exporting cashew at that stage. But industry challenges Olam. Could you move to the next stage and add value to it? Can we use the cluster system through innovation and technology? Identify 30 farmers, 10 factories, monitor their stocks, and then build capacity to export to AFTA. This is the story of AGI. This is the story of industry.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. I'd like to bring in Edward at this point. You're running the state's interest governance agency. Now, the state's responsibility is to create the bedrock on which industry can grow. Historically, we haven't had the best in terms of the efficiencies that the state brings into the business environment so that businesses can leverage with innovation to deliver. How is government, or rather SIGA, working with the various agencies that report or you oversee to ensure that, for example, the Registrar General's Department and their digitization drive is delivering a very quick turnaround for registration, that people are able to interface with the GRA very quickly, how exactly is SIGA poised to ensure that the ease of doing business essentially is brought down to how quickly can you get things done and move on?
Thank you very much. I think I agree with what Humphrey said in terms of, we need to connect the dots. And I think that's where SIGA comes in. Traditionally, the SOEs have not seen themselves as key enablers in connecting the dots in terms of business efficiency, in terms of creating the economic superhighway, as I call it, for SMEs to also thrive. For me, one of the things that I keep telling my colleague CEOs is that in whatever sector you find yourself, it's your responsibility as the CEO of that industry to be able to create the space for the entrepreneurs, for the small CEOs to also have that superhighway to drive on. And I give the example of, for instance, my own sector, media. When I joined CNN, we were a very small company. And it was our responsibility to take our entire company portfolio of cartoons, news around the world. The key enablers for us, wherever we went, was the American Embassy, the economic counselors. They would open the doors for you and they would ensure that your ease of doing business, your cost of doing business, everything was dramatically cut down. So the same thing applies to the SOEs. Unfortunately, our SOEs were created to facilitate and provide jobs, but that key role of being an enabler was absent, and that's what we are hoping to do. When I took this job, my first meeting was with the Minister of Finance. And I must say, for somebody like me, I've worked in the corporate sector, I've built my own business. When I asked him what his expectation was, he said to me that SOEs have to contribute 30% to the GDP. I did a quick calculation in my head and I said, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "But do they know that?" He said, "That's your responsibility now to make them know." Now, when I went back to my office and I started doing the calculation, I realized that they could even do more. And that's why if you've been reading and hearing the last airwaves, the last few weeks, we put a lot of pressure to make sure that they get simple things like their own management accounts, audited accounts right. Now, what that happens is if they're able to do that, it improves our physical space, because traditionally only central government accounts was factored into our GDP and the local government. Now, bringing the SOEs expands that base. Now, to be able to do that, we need to leverage on technology. To be able to do that, we need to reduce the amount of mismanagement and perceived corruption in the system, because then it means that their bottom lines are going to improve. Also, there has to be enforcement and discipline, because if we're able to get our SOEs working, then private sector business will improve dramatically. In most countries, even in the US, if you look at all the Fortune 500 companies and you look at their base, where are they getting the most R&D from, or where did they start? Most often than not, it's from federal government. And that's how it works, because if you have to start on your own, it's very, very difficult. I mean, I worked for Coca-Cola, and the history of Coca-Cola could not have been what it is today had it not been for the US government facilitating and opening the doors for them to all these countries. And I think that's what we seek to do with the SOEs. There has to be a radical change in mindset in terms of even our chief executives themselves. There's constant conversations going on. Since I came, the president has met them. Finance minister spoke to the CEOs recently. Next week, we're meeting with the chairman, because we realize that if we're able to improve governance, if we're able to make them meet a certain percentage of their targets, then our economy is going to expand, the economic superhighway is going to be created, and a lot of companies can and entrepreneurs, young people who want to start their own business can ride on that highway. Right now, we seem to have that highway. It's littered with a lot of potholes. It's narrow. We want to create 6-lane, 12-lane, super economic super highways so that more business people can thrive. And that's hand will also help to create more wealth in the country and also help to increase the financial viability of even small companies. And that's really our objective now.
I think the Registrar General's Department has embarked on a certain amount of digitization. How far has RGD come, and what has made it possible?
The Registrar General, very soon, there's going to be a split, and we are going to have the Office of the Registrar of Companies separated from the Registrar General. That would be marriages and administration of estates. And why is that? Because we want to focus on the businesses. We are having off the company, the business registration part, so that we can give very effective services. So we've done a lot of reforms, and I'm sure most of you can attest to that. And we started this since even prior to 2008. We started first with the basics, the law. We had a law that was in operation since 1963. So you agree with me. There were very redundant provisions in there that made doing business very difficult because you had to comply with the law. But we've removed all these provisions so that there's ease of doing business. What we incorporated into the act was the Electronic Transactions Act provisions, whereby you can transact all forms of businesses by way of filings, keeping registers, doing your mergers and acquisitions, filing your annual returns. And if you can, businesses would recall, during the COVID times, we had to issue directives for companies to have online virtual AGMs. That was because it was very impossible for, companies to come together to hold their AGMs. These are some of the things that we've done. We've tried to create a one-stop shop. When you say doing business, it's not just registering the businesses. It involves the GRA, it involves RGD, it involves SNIT, because you need to pay your pays. It involves the metropolitan assemblies, so that they can also give you business operating permits. Currently, we've incorporated the NIA because that's the way to go. That's the ID that everyone requires to have a business. What else? We have online portal. We have a very effective online portal where you can go and do your basic search, incorporate your businesses, and we are improving it. We are constantly improving it. Because of the law, we are going to even change the system so that it would make sure it covers all the provisions in the Act, so that from the comfort of your home, you should be able to do any transactions that...
Edward mentioned the need for a mindset change.
Yes.
How much of that has made the change at RGD possible? We're very resistant to change as a people.
I know.
How were you able to get this far?
We are doing a lot of change management training. We've been training our staff for them to know that it's not going to be business as usual. If we have this new law that is asking us to do things electronically, we cannot continue doing the same old things. We also want the public to have the business community to have a mind change. They should use the system that have been put in place. They should stop using middlemen. That's also a mind change. It's not just the RGD. They need to file their returns. As I say, there are obligations and responsibilities. The RGD is there to provide a legal framework. The government provides that security for you to register your businesses. We maintain it, and we give out information, right? And then we expect that the companies would also supply that information updated information, correct information, so that there's synergy.
Thanks. Deborah, I'd like to come to you on the place of the Securities and Exchange Commission in this. We tend to forget that the SEC has a lot to do, not just when it comes to the financial services or capital markets, but businesses rely on you. And when you're doing M&As for businesses that are listed, you're called upon. But more importantly, what are the regulations that you have in place for market operators to meet present and future challenges and be able to leverage on the growth trajectory that we're on at the moment?
So just to say that what is the Securities and Exchange Commission and what's the space that we occupy? So just to put it in context, I can say that at the time of revoking the licenses of 50 companies, the money they held was 8.1 billion Ghana cedis. And that's just 50 companies within our space. So indeed, there is some money within the space that we regulate. And how do we give the enabling environment to these companies? We have laws and guidelines to ensure that the market is transparent, because when people are investing, they need to know that the market is transparent and it's fair and it's efficient. So once we have these rules, we are protecting the investor who is putting their money in that space, and also making sure that the market is run with integrity. And how do we do this? We realize that there's a lot of innovation going on, and the SEC doesn't want to be behind with innovation. So we've issued a regulatory sandbox guideline which gives room for innovation. People can come in that space and try out all the innovations they have. And the panel before us spoke about lack of infrastructure. In the SEC space, we have patient capital. That's what we say about our space. So what do? We have guidelines. We've issued another guideline on private funds, where private equity venture capital can come into that space and have some safety nets. So those are some of the things that we have done in terms of providing guidelines. And after we've done that, the investor needs to be educated, because if you don't have an educated investor, they wouldn't come into your space. So we also conduct financial literacy. And there's a lot of talk about SMEs struggling to find capital. We have an alternate market under the stock exchange where the rules are more relaxed for SMEs to also come in there and raise some capital. So we know that infrastructure is necessary, so we make sure that there's room for patient capital in our space for infrastructure. And then we also make sure that SMEs come into our space and are within some safety net. But when people invest, when they are ready to take their money back, we also make sure that that investor who's put their money in the project is also protected. So that's the way we operate in the ecosystem.
When it's all said and done, the Commissioner General of the Ghana Revenue Authority has to ensure that government is able to raise its own revenue to ensure the level playing field we're talking about. One of the parameters for measuring the doing business index is taxation. And on that, we scored 53. It's the lowest in all of the parameters in the last ranking. How are we going to change that?
Thank you very much. I think you are right. That is one of the parameters. And it's also very right that it should be one of the parameters, because at the end of the day, paying tax is not easy. And therefore, if you don't make the paying of the tax easy, then it becomes really more difficult for you to get the revenue. So it's very, very important that the paying of the tax should be to be convenient for the taxpayer to pay. And the scoring that you were referring to was the last time, which is over 5 years ago. And I want to mention that we have done a lot in the last couple of years to ensure that we change this situation completely. If you look at the Revenue Administration Act, ironically, there are 3 things that, apart from the many other things that we have done, in the Revenue Administration Act, there were 3 things that they have mentioned specifically that the Commissioner General must look at automating or digitalizing these 3 areas. 1 was the filing of tax, 2 was the payment of tax, and 3 is the issuing of tax grant certificate. And today, in the last 2 years, 2 of these 3 has been dealt with. and left it for one. And this year, we'll deal with that one as well.
Which one?
Number one was filing of tax. And today, we file tax online. Where previously, years ago, we were all filing the tax manually. You have to go to our office, carry your files and all those things. In fact, as at May this year, we've asked all large corporate tax organizations, that taxpayers, that we are not accepting manual filing at all. Okay. Number two was the payment of tax. Until last year, you have to physically walk to our tax offices. We had 257 tellers. And the question that we kept asking ourselves is, are we a bank or a tax organization? And so we said the banks are more capable of handling the cash, and we are capable of collecting the tax. Collecting the tax is different from collecting cash. And today, people can pay online. They can pay by doing *222# hash, and they can pay their tax. People can pay through all the various means, and also using the Ghana.gov platform. And so, when we finished, we had to retrain 257 tellers into being able to rather go there and collect tax rather than going to collect cash. Because for the cash, you can sit in your office and do it. And I also want to assure that we have gone very far in terms of automating the tax clearance certificate. And therefore, we are coming to a point where you don't need to now write and apply, and we will launch it very soon. But you'll be able to have your tax status. And we are doing it in two ways. We are doing it through a USSD code, such that if you put your USSD code *222# hash and you put in your Ghana card number, it will tell you whether you are compliant or you are not compliant. And if you go onto our website, also we'll have a portal there. If you put in your tax certificate, and therefore we are going to work, and the Vice President is supporting us on this, where we are linking up with all the other agencies. And so the time is coming in Ghana that when you want to renew your driving license, you have to put in your Ghana card number and to tell whether you are compliant or not compliant. If you are not compliant, license will not be renewed.
Compliance is important.
If you want to do your roadworthy, same thing. And it's not something that you have to go too far to go and search for it. Because when you do your *222# hash and you punch it there to tell whether you are compliant or not, when we get there, all of us will file our tax. Because nobody will compel you. The technology, the digitization will ensure compliance.
Thank you. Reminds me of the point that Dr. Macaulay said. We have to have structures and we have to have systems.
I'll tell you one quick story and then I'll end. The MD for Guinness was here. I traveled with her team in the north, trying to look at some of the projects that we're doing. And then I wanted to use the escort. They said, no, sir, we can't use the escort. I said, why can't you use the escort? They said, sir, you have to keep to 80 kilometers per hour. Mm-hmm. If we go beyond 1 kilometer, we'll be in trouble. And I said, oh, but we are in the north. He said, sir, as soon as we pass the 81 kilometer, an alert will go to our office. And that alert will show on my phone that I have gone past the 80 kilometer. And because there was technology, they followed me 80 kilometer.
A round of applause for that. Compliance indeed is important. Right, so I deliberately left out George and Professor Korte to the end. Now, the MSME space is big. As a matter of fact, if my memory serves me right, more than 85% of businesses registered in this country sits in there. And the story is not very different across the continent. And so if we're going to take advantage of this 3 trillion opportunity through the AFCFTA, the small boys and girls are going to have to step up. In your opinion, George, wherein lies the space for what Humphrey calls the capacity building and collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, especially focusing on the MSME space?
Thank you, Chair. So I think that the collaboration between the private sector and the public sector is very key in developing any economy. And you can attest to it. I think that COVID did expose all of us as to how preparedness we are in terms of collaborating between the public sector and the private sector. Organizations that survived strongly, there was every evidence that they really prepared themselves during, before even the pandemic and after the pandemic. We have examples of Amazon, which is, I would say, largest online business, where they were able to grow their business for over 40% during the COVID period. That was because the economies in which they operate from have been able to ensure that the digital landscape is open for industry or private sector, and for that matter, all other sectors within small, medium scale, to be able to participate and then invest into it. So I think that the area of collaboration is what is going to take us there, and that is for government to intentionally invest in the infrastructure as far as technology or digital space is concerned. I would even say that we just would not have to look at starting from businesses alone. Yes, businesses are already at a certain stage already, and so there is the need for the public sector to look at retooling and rescaling its personnel, in as much as the private sector is already doing its parts. But we also need to look at the next step, which is our educational institutions. How do we bring them on board? During the COVID period, educational institutions had to sit at home, and for that matter, the whole educational curricula had to even change, or the calendar had to change. If we were able to, or if you could see some schools being able to run even during the COVID period, then that should tell us that infrastructure development within the public sector, and for that matter, enhancing the whole economic or the ecosystem, is very key in all sectors being able to tap into it. If we can get to the level where, for instance, university students do not have to go to the exam hall to be writing paper examination. By the time they are coming out, they already have certain skill because we have already started something with them. And my colleague earlier on mentioned that in Deloitte, we say talent management. We've moved from our staff being considered as employees, but then rather taking the talents and then managing and growing them. And so how do we grow them? By ensuring that we give them the proper skill. In terms of technology, in terms of capacity building, we're able to put them. I believe that the public sector, yes, we believe, or we agree that there's some steps have already been taken by the GRA. I can attest to what Commissioner General said. If not what was put in place during the last two periods, I think tax collection and tax filings would have been extremely difficult. I think that 2020, 2021 was one of the years that they did even more in tax collection, even within the COVID era, in as much as there was less interaction between the public sector and the office. I'm looking at moving to the level where after one registered with the Registrar General, I don't need to go to the GRA to register. I agree that after registration with the Registrar General, you get your thing, and the same thing is what we are using. But we need to move from that stage, where registering with the Registrar General straight away is linked to the GRA, straight away is linked to the GIPC, straight away is linked to SNIT. And so all these registrations are done concurrently within the ecosystem that we are operating from. So you don't need to sit and be going to the GRA. We need to get to the level that we are reducing the human interaction. We have been able to do it during the COVID period to a very large extent. I think gradually you see a drop or decline in that gains that we made during the COVID period. You see that now we are looking at more physical interaction, and I believe that the more we are able to enhance this digital, this technology space that we are talking about, it even reduces this level of perceived corruption and other things that we have been talking about. Because Commissioner General has mentioned here that we are looking at TCC, that's tax clearance certificate, being issued once you log on to the system, you have filed your returns, you have paid your taxes, and all that is expected of you. I don't need to go to the GRA. I think GFM, you carry the news where somebody had to get a way to get his tax clearance certificate. But if we have these systems in place, then all this will be avoided. So I think that collaboration and investment is what is going to take us there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And finally, Professor Peter Korte, 2 questions in one. Should Africa start looking at a new parameter and in measuring ease of doing business? Because in the Akan adage, in Sanya and Yepe, do we need to, as we've been talking on the credit referencing, should we start looking inward for our own parameters that is still consistent enough to make us competitive globally? And in terms of the AFCFTA's implementation, should we consider some way to either standardize or harmonize the legal framework across the continent so that the ease of doing business in one country doesn't differ too much from another?
Well, thank you very much. The first one is, if we want to be competitive, globally, we don't have to have our own standards or indicators. We ought to use the globally accepted standards. If we deviate from that, I don't think that will be very good, in my view. Yes, we can have some localized ones, but still subscribe to the global standards for measuring competitiveness, and I believe that is the sure way to go. Before I answer your second question, I have 1 or 2 I wanted to pick on the engagement with the private sector. I think the incentive regime have to be looked at carefully. Government using these fiscal incentives is reaching out to the private sector. Equally, you expect the private sector to also perform its role. We have these tax exemptions. Last year or a year ago, we were about 4.5 billion import exemptions alone. I see in the 2022 budget, government has budgeted 2-point-something billion cedis. It's coming down, which is very good. However, I would want government to go a step further to ensure that tax exemptions are given to industries to perform certain roles, to employ, to produce, to export, bring in foreign exchange revenue. We should put in mechanisms for monitoring some of this so that we get value for money. And I think that's one thing I expect the engagement with SMEs. It should be a win-win situation for government and for the private sector. And then the last one, GRA, I am so excited about filing tax online. It's very easy. However, GRA can go a step further. The NCC and many others, I think many SMEs are not informed about the way the system operates. The local businessman will not understand or might not be very conversant with the technology. So I encourage GRA to go a step further, either at the district level or at the regional level, community level, educate people, educate entrepreneurs about how to use the system. We have taken a very brilliant step. We have invested in it. We need to get the most out of it. Then your last one about AFCFTA harmonizing. I think that question should have gone to David Osofu-Bote. He's more of the legal, than myself. But I think, but it's quite difficult. Countries have their own legal regimes, and it will be difficult for you to change them. Of course, it will take some time for us to be able to harmonize that relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all time would allow this panel. A round of applause for Deborah Malcia Jemfra, Deputy DG of the Securities and Exchange Commission, seated right next to me, and Reverend Amishadai Oswamwa, the Commissioner General of the Ghana Revenue Authority, and Professor Peter Korte from the Economics Department of the University of Ghana, and George Ankuma, he's the lead tax and regulatory partner at Deloitte. Next to him is Dr. Humphrey Eyim Dake, President of AGI, and Domtie Efuasapong, is a principal attorney with the Registrar General's Department, and of course, Yofi Grant, GIPC CEO, and Ambassador Edward Boateng, the DG of the State Interest and Governance Authority. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Wish we could have stayed some more, but unfortunately, that's all time would allow us. A round of applause, please. And I am Kweku Inshira Ado. I work with Asasi Radio. God bless you all.